I've got a few announcements to make. Then we're going to go through our officer nominations and elections. Carolyn, I could use your help there for a minute because I think for a minute I'm not allowed to run that part of the meeting. But I don't think it'll be that complicated. And then we can get to our guests tonight. We have two candidates who are running for borough president. That's Mark Levine and Brad Hoylman. And then we have our ninth and final district attorney candidate who will be joining us right around 8 o'clock. So I hope you guys can stick around a little bit later than usual. There was a WNYC forum for district attorneys that's running right now. And so Tali, Farhadian, and Weinstein could not join us until 8 o'clock. So that's that's why I slotted Brad Hoylman in here so we could keep ourselves busy during the hour. But it does make for a slightly longer meeting. I hope that's okay with everybody. First, a few announcements. After tonight, we're actually going to focus on 2020 elections for a few weeks, and set aside 2021 until after Election Day. We're actually co-hosting a fundraiser Saturday night with other Democratic clubs from Manhattan. I sent out the link for that on Sunday, and I will do so again immediately tomorrow. We're raising money, we're splitting money between the General Biden campaign and also the big 4 Senate races. That's in Maine and North Carolina and Arizona and Colorado. So I hope you can join us for that. We've got, there are going to be a bunch of elected officials from the city who join us. I think there's some musical guests set up. Most of this was arranged by, I believe, by VID, Village Independent Dems. There might have been some other folks involved in that. We're not responsible for any of it, but I would love everybody to show up so we can raise some money and enjoy that time together. That'll be Saturday night. Then we get
among the people who are going to be there is Jerry Nadler, who will be really interesting to hear what he has to say right now. And Sing Out Louise are one of the people who are doing the singing. So they're fun. They're weird. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Can I make an announcement of another upcoming event?
Sure.
It's tentatively scheduled for Sunday, October 25th. We are going to be participating in a marathon phone bank. So, if you've been doing our phone banks, Leo staff. Sorry guys, ice maker. If you've been doing our Monday phone banks, it's the same deal, but think of it as your chance to, instead of taking a ride to Pennsylvania and canvassing in person, we want people to commit to many hours of phone banking on Sunday, October 25th. It doesn't have to be for the whole 10 hours that we are going to be running the phone bank, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m.
But it could be.
But it could be. And, and if you've ever done canvassing trips, they're long, long days, so, and all the New York for Biden folks who've been doing phone banks, there are going to be a number of these set up. So we will give you that information as we have it. The one that Grant Street Dems is going to be co-hosting is probably October 25th, but please stay tuned for that.
And there will also be other ones that weekend, the following weekend, probably Election Day. I'll be sure to send everybody the links for all of these things so that we can do some work on our way to Election Day. And also just keep in mind, we're running our own phone bank Mondays at 5 p.m. We've got 3 more of those. So if you haven't been able to join us, please do. And that'll also be a good chance for you to just get a feel for how the system works so that when we do our big marathon calls, you already know how that stuff works. And then just please keep in mind that Sunday, November 15th, so this is then after Election Day, and we're going to turn our attention back to 2021. Sunday, November 15th at 2 p.m., we're going to hear once again from all of the candidates for City Council District 1. And we will actually vote on an early endorsement for that one race on November 15th. So please mark that. We want to have as many of us there as possible so that that endorsement is really means something. Okay, so the first bit on our agenda for the next 10 minutes, this is our annual election of officers for president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. I don't believe we have any surprises tonight, but I'm happy to be surprised if we do. What I'm going to do temporarily is turn this over to our fearless district leader, Carolyn Laskow, who can run the meeting, I suppose, while we take nominations for president.
Okay.
And then once we figure that one out, we can move on from there.
Great, thank you. I would like to nominate Jeremy Sherber for third, I think your third term as president. Do I have a fourth term? Is there a second? I see Brett, I see Michael Marino, Bill Ferns, great. All right, so that has been seconded. How are we conducting this vote?
Well, first, let's just make sure there aren't any other nominations.
Sorry, are there any other nominations for Grant Street Dems president?
Move to close nominations.
All right, move to close nominations for president has been seconded.
So at this point, you can approve this by acclamation. We don't have to worry about fancy voting techniques.
All right, so Jeremy Sherber has been approved by acclamation for another term as president of Grant Street Democrats. Let the record, yay, Jeremy. Thank you for your continued service.
I do want to remind everybody, by the way, first of all, I have been loving working on this club. It's been a really great 3 years, and I'm looking forward to a fourth. I think the 2021 elections for New York City are just extraordinarily impactful, and I'm really looking forward to being involved in those endorsements, more candidate interviews, and then really campaigning for our chosen candidates. So it's going to be a really exciting year. I do want to remind everybody that we have a term limits in our bylaws for president of the club. So this is actually the last year that I can be president of the club. So everybody start the wheels turning and figure out which wonderful person is going to pick this up next year. I'm sure you're out there, and I'm sure it's going to be great. So thank you. Let's do nominations for the other offices. I'd like to start off by nominating Marion Rydell for vice president. Do I have a second? I see a bunch of seconds, Judy and Bill. Are there any other nominations for vice president? Okay, great. Then Bill, do you want to move to close the nominations for vice president? You were very good at that. Let's just take the nominations for the other offices and maybe we can do the vote all at once. I would like to nominate Brett LETNER as treasurer of the club. Do I have a second for that nomination?
Second.
Matthew and Marion, thank you. Are there any other nominations for treasurer? Okay, great. I will close the nominations for treasurer, and our last office is secretary. I would like to nominate our current secretary, Judy Wind, to continue in that role. Do we have any seconds?
Second.
Everybody's seconding.
Yeah.
Are there any other nominations for the role of secretary? Okay, great. I will move to close the nominations for all of our officers. I move to approve Marion as vice president, Brett as treasurer, Judy as secretary by acclamation. Are there any objections? Then there we go.
Okay.
Terrific.
Congratulations.
Thank you all very much.
Welcome,
also,
Marion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to learning from Jeremy in his final year, because I think he does so much, and sometimes I'm just like blown away by it. So.
Hey guys, I also want to recognize Daria Segolini, who has been our treasurer for the last 3 years, and this year various actual life things started coming in the way, and so she requested to not have the role again for another year, which is why we have a little shuffling. But Daria has been really great to work with. I think she said she's going to continue to hold on to our printer and be the Grand Street Dems print shop when we need it. So I'm hoping to. I know she had she said she wasn't feeling well and couldn't make it tonight, but I just want to recognize her tonight as well.
Absolutely, and welcome back, Brett, in your new capacity. That's great. I love your growth mindset.
Thank you. Excited to do it.
Yeah.
She was a national.
All right. Well, if there aren't any other announcements, then we can start our guests a little early, which is nice. I'd like to welcome Councilmember Mark Levine, who has joined us a couple of times in the past for other reasons, but tonight he's here to talk about his campaign for Manhattan Borough President. Mark, if you want to just take a couple minutes to introduce yourself, let everybody know about your campaign, and then we'll take some questions. Just for everybody else, just as we've done this before, if you can use the raise hands feature or drop a note in the chat, and I'll know that you've got a question for Mark once we're ready for that. So Mark, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. It's great to be back at Grand Street. Congrats to all the victorious club leadership candidates. Refreshing to see an election go off without a hitch. We should be so lucky on November 3rd. I'm just full of admiration for what Grand Street has accomplished, and to all of you who have built this club, just proving the power of an aggressive, progressive, reform-minded club. It still matters, arguably more than ever. I know you're mobilizing for November 3rd. It's life or death stakes. I don't think that's exaggerating it. But I want to thank you for also looking ahead over the horizon to 2021, when New York City has what in itself, I believe, will be the most consequential election in a generation for us amidst this crisis, and with term limits, meaning an almost top to bottom turnover in leadership. I'm running for borough president now to fight for that future. And it's a fight I've been engaged in really my whole adult life. Since I graduated college with a physics degree and became a bilingual math and science teacher at Junior High School 149 in the South Bronx, a proud union member. And it's an experience that has shaped much of my career since. I went on to start a nonprofit uptown in Washington Heights, actually a community development credit union, essentially a cooperatively owned financial institution called Neighborhood Trust, helping low-income families get access to and control over financial services. The credit union has now made $25 million in small loans, helping people do everything from buy their first home computer to pay for education to start a small business. And that credit union is the base that has allowed me to run for office now and win twice in one of the most diverse districts in New York City, the 7th Council District, which includes centered on West Harlem and parts of Washington Heights and the Upper West Side as well. In my first term, I was really proud to pass landmark legislation, making New York City the first place in America to establish right to counsel for tenants in housing court, which has already had a dramatic effect, really a game change for tenants in New York City and being emulated nationally. I had the pleasure of chairing the Parks Committee in my first term. Like all of you, I see them as essential for livability in New York City. So I am well familiar with how amazing and important Corlear's Hook Park is. And I think Michael's hanging out in there right now. Thank you to everything you and so many club members have done for that park. I'm also aware of the travesty that has been the East River Park Resiliency Plan and the way the community was steamrolled in that process. It's just completely unacceptable. And there are more fights ahead on that project, which I'm happy to talk about, but want to acknowledge how concerned I am about it. This term I've have had the honor of chairing the Health Committee in the City Council, where I've just been focused day and night on this pandemic to be a voice for science, taking on the science denier in chief down in Washington, and on more than one occasion, taking on City Hall in that fight as well. And I'm running now to succeed the great Gail Brewer for borough president, to take those fights to the next level, to confront the profound inequality which this pandemic has revealed and exacerbated. Inequality not just in access to healthcare, but also in housing and employment, all of which has led to the profound disproportionate impact on people of color from COVID. I'm fighting to directly confront systemic racism, which persists in New York City and every sector of life here, from criminal justice to the way medical care is delivered to school desegregation. I'm fighting to save small businesses, which face, it's not an exaggeration, to say an existential threat right now, and they need rent relief. They need access to legal services. They need access to credit, and I'm working on all of those fronts. I'm fighting to help protect tenants by taking right to counsel immediately to every zip code in the city, including Lower Manhattan, because we're facing an unprecedented avalanche of cases in housing court. And we have to make sure that no tenant has to confront that without the benefit of an attorney. And I'm fighting for really big, bold ideas like residential parking permits so that we can keep suburban commuters from dumping their cars in our neighborhoods. And creation of a public bank in New York City would be the first city in America to do that. So that we can take some of our public money out of Wall Street and put it into public purpose projects, from affordable housing to worker cooperatives to green energy. This is a lot. It's a lot to take on. We're going to need an incredibly diverse coalition to pull this off. It's exactly the kind of coalition I'm building in my borough president's race, a coalition as diverse as this very borough, with support from top to bottom in Manhattan, including amazing leaders downtown, including like none other than District Leader Carolyn Laskow, District Leader Daisy Pies, District Leader Paul Newell, and many other local leaders. So I care a lot about this community and this club, and I'm just honored to have a chance to speak with you now about my campaign and the issues at hand.
Great, thank you, Mark. Are there any hands up, or
Tommy's got a hand up.
Do we need to get started? Tommy does? Okay,
yeah.
Great. Tommy, go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. I have been involved for the last 8 years in trying to come up with a plan that makes sense for East River Park. You mentioned it, but I'm going to go into more depth a little later, but it's $1.1 billion of city funds in a $1.5 billion project. At this time of COVID, with a broke state government, a broke city government, we just were told that $900 million owed New York City teachers will not be paid. At the same time, we're spending $1.1 billion on a project which has never had a serious independent review. So I'd like to know exactly what you plan to do to intervene and stop this project before the contracts are let and we get to a point of no return.
Well, Tommy, I appreciate you bringing this up. I'm not sure I would go so far as to say that this project shouldn't be done. Please give me a moment to explain. I do fear that another superstorm is not a possibility, but a certainty eventually in this era of rising seas and global climate change. But as I mentioned before, this process has been disastrously executed, and the work that you and many other leaders in this neighborhood had done for years to develop a balanced plan that really built in the community's perspective was swept aside at the last minute. What we have in place now has left me with a lot of concerns. First, on the cost. Parks projects are notorious for cost overruns, and what a disaster it would be if the project starts, the price goes up, and there's a stall in the progress that would leave the work half done. That would just be unacceptable. And even not accounting for cost overruns, parks projects have a horrible track record of running late, and if what should be a 4 or 5 year project drags on to much longer than that, that would be unacceptable and a disaster. And I'm concerned about impact on the neighborhood, disruption and safety concerns for people in the surrounding area. So we have a lot to do to hold the city accountable for this, to make sure it's done in a way that incorporates your perspective, the community's perspective, that keeps the neighborhood safe, yes, but does it with minimal disruption and avoids what would be really hellish delays and cost overruns.
Well, could I just follow up a little? You're still not telling me whether right now everybody agrees there's something has to be done, and the community came up with a plan after several years that came up with a series of berms and walls that would have only destroyed about a third of the park. And now we're faced, again, as I said, a point of no return where the entire park is going to be leveled, 1,000 trees were destroyed, unless somebody intervenes. And I would ask one thing, all along, including, I'm going to read to you from the mayor's press release on September 28, 2018. And this is something the independent consultant has tried to get, everybody has tried to get, and nobody has. It says from the mayor, the adoption of the new design follows a value engineering study performed earlier this year and a review of the project by a panel of experts with experience from around the nation. We have never been able to obtain a piece of paper from the city of New York which gives us any information about this value engineering report, which is what the city based its entire change of plan on. Can you get us this value engineering report?
I'll certainly try. Absolutely. Be happy to help on that. I'll reach out to City Hall right away. I'd like to see it myself.
We all would, including the independent expert. Thank you.
Tommy.
Marion?
Keen was next, actually, with the hand up. Keen, then Marion, then Brett.
Okay, thanks. Keen?
Yeah.
Right. Rezoning. Apparently the mayor has some plan for rezoning down here. I don't really understand it, but I wonder what a borough president can do. And could you quickly explain what they're trying to do and why I should be opposed to it?
Are you referring to Soho NoHo or another project?
Yeah. Well, I think, isn't there specifically Soho NoHo, but isn't there a mayor's plan to change the zoning down here?
We haven't seen.
I think that's the most recent plan that came from the mayor. Yeah.
Right. I mean, there are some smaller projects all around downtown that are mostly their proposals by individual property owners, but this one is city led. We haven't seen details of what the mayor is proposing, but he's offered a general outline for a community that is both a precious, absolutely unique, historic neighborhood that I think we all treasure, but also a neighborhood that's seen almost no affordable housing development in decades. And I certainly have a view of affordable housing development that it shouldn't only be concentrated in low-income communities of color. And there are vacant or nearly vacant parcels on the edges of Soho NoHo, which are not under historic landmarking, which think there's potential for affordable housing on those sites. And so, yes, I think this is something worth exploring with sensitivity to the balance we want to maintain what makes Soho and NoHo some of the most wonderful communities in the world, but also ensure that we have affordable housing that we desperately need and are going to need even more so coming out of this crisis.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Keen.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you.
Marion?
I actually want to ask some more about that. I was going to ask more about, can I ask 2 questions quick? So
Fine by me, yeah.
I've heard conversations in which there was some talk about if the East River Park gets filled over for a certain amount of time, there's an as of right something that comes into play that might allow development along there. So that's the first question. I've had other people say, no, you're crazy, but that may not be the evidence that I'm crazy.
Everyone I have asked about this is adamantly denied that this is a vulnerability, but I will, based on your prompting, make a triple, quadruple check on that. Great,
that's good. And so the second part is not unrelated, and it really follows up with Keen's question about zoning. So not just about the NoHo Soho zoning,
right,
but about upzoning in general. And this neighborhood has become ground zero, other than Midtown, for upzoning. And we just had the Go Broom project that has every variance imaginable and goes from an R8 to an R9. We have the 2 bridges projects that we don't know what's going to happen. There's a plan on the table, the Chinatown Working Group plan, that has different zoning for each neighborhood depending on what's already there, right, in the Lower East Side and Chinatown. So I want to know what you know about that plan, and do you support it?
So I need to know more about the Chinatown plan. I certainly join you and many others in the club in opposing the 2 bridges towers. I think I mentioned before, I put an enormous value on affordable housing development. We need it, but I also care about protecting the integrity of neighborhoods. I care about human scale in neighborhoods, and I just feel that what's been proposed at 2 bridges violates those principles in dramatic fashion. Look, I'm looking for balance. I'm looking for a respect to the history and scale of neighborhoods. I'm also well aware that we have to find a way to grow for the economic imperative and because we need the affordable housing. So the challenge is to find ways to do that are balanced, that are smart, and that don't destroy neighborhoods. But I'm committed to work with you and others on the Chinatown plan, and promise I'll familiarize myself with the details.
Thanks. Brett, you dropped a question in the chat. Do you want to go ahead and ask that yourself?
Sure. Hey, Mark. Really sort of generally speaking, obviously the pandemic has affected so many, but of course it's really decimated tourism in Manhattan and commerce overall. So I was just curious if you had any ideas that you could share about ways that you see achieving solvency for businesses, recouping for losses across all sort of different industries, and then ways to bring businesses back or even attract new ones to try to, lift the city that's been, damaged so badly this past year.
Thank you, Brett. The economic blow to small businesses, to the economy, has just been devastating. 1.3 million people estimated have lost their livelihood. We've lost thousands of small businesses, and most others are in quite precarious conditions. I'm optimistic that we will come back, but I don't want to downplay the challenges of the next few months until we have a vaccine fully deployed, and that each passing day, week, and month for some businesses puts them at greater vulnerability. So on the micro level, we need to have some form of rent relief for small businesses, and there's some great legislation in the city council that would offer tax credit to property owners if they reset leases at lower rents for commercial tenants. There's authorizing legislation at the state level that's being carried by actually your Assembly Member New and your Senator Kavanaugh. And then it would be up for the city to pass that legislation, which Council Members Lander and Powers, I believe, are pushing, which I strongly support. We need a top to bottom review of fees and fines that really should prioritize safety and not see that as a revenue engine for the city first and foremost, which unfortunately in the past it too often has. As businesses can look to rebuilding, we need to dramatically expand access to credit, something, as I mentioned before, I've spent much of my life working on, and something which a public bank would take to, I think, would make us the world leader in opening that up for small business. But yes, we have to get tourism back here. We have to get people going to work in Midtown Manhattan again, because their entire ecosystems of small businesses that survive around theaters, around office buildings, and everything from street vendors to clothing stores to restaurants to shoe repair. And I don't think we've talked enough about those sectors. I think obviously we've been focused on things like schools and restaurants, a real short-term urgency there, but we need a plan developed now for arts and entertainment. Of course, Broadway's not coming back till May. It's possible smaller theaters could come back sooner. And a plan to get office work restored. Right now, it's about 10% capacity. And some of that work may never come back, but, and that's an opportunity too, to repurpose some of that real estate. But let's work harder to bring back business, large and small. Government has to be a partner in that effort. And it's something I'm really committed to.
Thanks. Bill, I see your hand up. Why don't you go ahead? This will be our last question, I think.
Okay, I just have a couple quick questions, mostly about zoning, and so maybe you could just answer them how you like. Where do you stand on commercial rent control, especially for storefronts? With zoning, a lot of the zoning is based on buildable square footage, but it allows for abuses with air rights. Would you be for putting height limits on buildings for zonings? And third, the City Planning Commission has 5 members each who are appointed by borough presidents. My experience with the City Planning Commission, they all basically work for either agencies or firms that benefit from big building projects. Would you be willing to appoint someone who was more for right-sizing zoning instead of just giving away the store? Thank you.
Well, absolutely I would. And I think we need some reform so that it's not so easy to overrule a borough president at the City Planning Commission. This would require charter change, but I'd love to see a requirement that there be a supermajority to overrule the borough president to strengthen that individual's hand in this process. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor since I think just about the day I got into office of the Small Business Job Survival Act, which would re-level the playing field in lease negotiations to help prevent landlords from crazy and unreasonable rent increases. And on height limits, yes, I'm working on a rezoning in Morningside Heights, which is in my district. It's a historic and very vulnerable neighborhood, which has had some wildly out of scale development. And we're proposing to add some density on the avenue so we get affordable housing, but we want a height limit because we're getting 35 and 40-story towers mid-block, and Morningside Heights. And that's a great balance there because we are going to get, assuming we can pass the rezoning, we would get affordability, but we could preserve the human scale that I was mentioning before.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, council member, thank you very much. That's our 20 minutes, but thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Grand Street Democrats. Let's win this on November 3rd and on to great things thereafter. Thanks, everybody. Be safe.
Our next guest, also running for Borough President of Manhattan in 2021, is our neighboring state senator, Brad Hoylman. And again, Senator Hoylman, if you want to just take a couple minutes to introduce yourself, talk about your campaign, and then we'll do the same thing. We'll take some questions.
Sure. What a pleasure to be here, Jeremy. It's good to see friends. It's good to be here today. You know, first and foremost, yes, I'm a senator, and I work very closely with your Senator Brian Kavanaugh, just 2 seats over on the floor of the Senate, to be exact. But I'm also a dad. I have 2 small children, and a 9-year-old and a 3-year-old. And it's been a struggle for all of us during this time of remote learning, you know, work-life balance, COVID-19. So I know that this is something a lot of us share. But I want you to know that over the last 8 years, I've been able to win major progressive victories in Albany, and I share in your club's victories too. After all, I was one of the first elected officials to call for Sheldon Silver's resignation, and I think you represent real change on the Lower East Side that portended what we've been able to do in Albany. Among bills that I've passed are GSD, which finally created a human rights law for transgender people. We didn't have that for decades in New York. When we passed the gay rights law back in the early 2000s, transgender people were left behind. Well, we caught up, and now they have complete protections. You cannot be fired if you're transgender. You cannot be kicked out of a restaurant. You cannot be denied an apartment. That was my legislation. I passed the Police Stat Act in this last round of criminal justice reforms. Believe it or not, up until we passed this legislation, there was no database which collected information as to whether an individual was killed in police custody or who was being arrested for what. Now we have that information, and I think it's going to create a real wealth of ability for policymakers to moving forward, develop intelligent criminal justice reforms. After the measles epidemic last year, I stuck my neck out, or maybe my arm out, and strengthened the vaccine requirements across the state of New York. Since then, I've been the target of a lot of hatred online and protests at my office and public events, but I will say it's one of the most important things I think I did, and I think it also points to the future of how we need to manage public health around vaccines and ensure that people opt in and have the information to do so. One of the bills I'm most proud about during this COVID-19 crisis is called the Tenant Safe Harbor Act. And because of the bill that I passed with Senator Liz Krueger, no New Yorker has been evicted from their apartment during the COVID-19 pandemic. We have to strengthen that and go further, but the Tenant Safe Harbor Act was the first legislation to do that. And I'm very proud of the fact that I introduced 3 separate bills to force Donald Trump to release his New York State tax returns. We actually passed one of them, and the governor signed it into law. And I have an inkling that Congress, in fact, requested those returns and leaked them to the New York Times. So we'll never know the truth around how the New York Times got those tax returns, but I'd like to think that Albany and, you know, little old me in the 27th state Senate district had something to do with it. You know, it's not just the big picture stuff. I've passed legislation to ban floating billboards. Remember those that used to ply up and down the East and the Hudson rivers? I required the state liquor authority to finally create an online database of all of their licenses and stipulations. It used to be that our local community boards, Susan Stetzer gave me the idea, had to actually file a Freedom of Information law to get that information, to understand what bars and restaurants were permitted to do. And I've delivered major new public space to Manhattan by forcing the NYPD to finally leave Pier 76 in the Hudson River Park. That's going to create tens of thousands of square feet of new open space, and NYPD needs to get off of that. I've also been working on things such as cracking down on drag racing throughout the borough. Introduced a bill that would allow speed cameras to actually capture those drag racers, and hopefully also quiet those mufflers on motorcycles. I've demanded that the NYPD recently wear masks like the rest of us do. They set a standard for the public. And frankly, as a member of the public, I'm not going to go up to a cop who's not wearing a mask. And actually, I don't think anyone should. I'm happy to see that the commissioner has followed our lead and has issued a directive, but we need him to start penalizing officers who break the rule. Frankly, I think the police commissioner should be fired, but that's another story. So I've got a record of getting things done and being creative, and that's what I want to do as borough president. I mean, no one can fill Gail Brewer's shoes for sure, but I've studied her leadership. I was a community board member for 10 years. In the village and was its chair for 3. And this is what I want to do as borough president. I'm developing what I call a Manhattan Marshall Plan. And in effect, I want every community board, all 12 community boards, during this time of tumult and planning where people are calling for upzonings here and rezonings there, what about our local communities? I want every local community board to develop a 197A plan that's mandated and facilitated by the borough president. We need a Manhattan that supports small businesses. As some of you might know, I'm the prime sponsor of what I consider to be landmark legislation called Save Our Storefronts with Assemblymember Harvey Epstein. And I'm also the prime sponsor, you may have read about it in the Times yesterday, of legislation that would create a commercial vacancy tax. So we don't see vacant spaces in our small storefronts after they've kicked out the commercial lessee and they're vacant for years, if not longer. And I think we need to be creative about how we look at 20 million square feet of empty office space that's sitting in the middle of Manhattan right now. What about supportive housing? What about affordable housing? What about entrepreneurship? And what about locating businesses, small businesses, New York City-based businesses in that space? That's what we can do if we have a mindset. Second, I think we need a Manhattan that radically reimagines its street space, not just permanent outdoor dining. I want to see a car-free Manhattan at the end of the day, and I want to use the borough presidency to get there. We should be setting aside our streets for parks and outdoor retail and schools and businesses, and we also need to make certain that our streets are safer. I'm very proud to have lowered the speed limit, working with my colleagues on the West Side Highway. We need to lower the speed limit throughout the entirety of Manhattan, and we need to return that power from Albany to our local elected officials. And I want to create a new Office of Public Space Management to speed along these kinds of open space issues and work strategically to cut fines and red tape. Third, we need a Manhattan that's economically equitable, that allows young people and artists to move here and senior citizens to retire without bankrupting themselves. I think one of the worst things we've seen in Manhattan over the last decade is the construction of luxury housing that gets bought out by out-of-town investors who don't even live in our neighborhoods. That's why I've introduced and am continuing to push forward for what I call a pied-à-terre tax, what is French for tax the rich who don't live in Manhattan. We need to use the borough president's planning and zoning powers to push aggressively for the end of the biggest tax giveaway in our state's history, which is called 421A, and end this failed 80-20 or 75-25 mix of mandatory inclusionary housing. That doesn't work. And frankly, that's what the mayor seems to be calling for in the Soho NoHo rezoning, and we cannot stand for it, folks. We need affordable housing. We do not need more luxury towers in Manhattan. So you can assure that I will fight for that as borough president. And finally, we need a Manhattan that's racially just. You know, you just look around, you know, all the borough president candidates are white. We have the worst segregated school system in the nation, and we haven't done anything about it. We also have kids that are sent to school, and I know this personally, who are dyslexic and never get screened. I want to create an office of public school parent resource and advocacy that helps parents in low-income Manhattan communities navigate the school system. We can do that through the borough president's office, as well as leverage the capital budget of the borough president, which is close to $100 million. I've created something called community board budgeting, which is similar to participatory budgeting, which a number of our council members have done. But instead, I'd ask the community boards how they want to leverage their capital dollars. And I've instituted that with my Senate budget this past budget cycle, and we've had some really great successes and a lot of funding, which I wouldn't have known about had the community boards not alerted me to it. But none of this can come without a strong and sustainable public health response. I think Gail has set a high bar by providing free office space and funding for help NYC. But those are just a few of my ideas. I'm really eager to talk more about it on this Zoom call, but in the future, I'll make sure that you have my contact information. For those of you who don't know me, I would love to sit down, get a socially distant coffee, and talk about how you think our borough can be better.
Thanks very much. That's a great intro. Let's get a couple questions in. I saw Tommy's hand up first. So Tommy, would you go ahead, please?
Sure. You may have heard my previous comments, but you represent part of the Lower East Side, including East River Park. So you have been involved in this process all along. And I want to just read a couple of sentences for you. It says, the city has stated on multiple occasions that the results of the 2018 value engineering and constructability review prompted them to change the plan. Now we are persuaded upon the city's assertion to date that it would be legal for the city to undertake this project, which involves demolishing East River Park for the primary purpose of providing coastal flood protection for the surrounding community, unless the state legislature adopts legislation authorizing the temporary alienation of this essential parkland. In spring 2018, the state said, the city said, you said, said that the would require alienation. Those are all from a press release that you sent out. And since then, you know, the community has gone in on alienation. We've gotten no help. This is a $1.5 billion project, $1.1 billion of city tax levy funds at a time when the state and the city are broke. But yet we're hearing crickets from everybody on this project. Why?
Well, thanks, Tommy. I would respectfully disagree. Senator Kavanaugh and I were very strident in our insistence that the state should have a role in this, that alienation was required. And we urged the city on numerous occasions, City Hall and the council on numerous occasions, to ensure that that the Parks Department followed the law. It, of course, as you know, went to court as a result of that disagreement. And we lost the argument on alienation. It's unfortunate because the state does have a role. That's why you have alienation, is to ensure that there is a check. And frankly, I couldn't agree more with you that this project, while important, nobody can deny that rising sea levels and protecting the East Side, including public housing, which was swamped by Superstorm Sandy, shouldn't have that kind of protection. On the other hand, I don't trust the city administration to what, you know, effectuate what is the local equivalent of Boston's Big Dig. I think they're going to screw it up. I'm with you on that. What I would do as Borough President, Tommy, is install a monitor over the project if it's not going to be defeated in court, because that's where it is right now. We need a monitor, and I think the Borough President's office is the perfect office to do that. Or maybe we work with other elected officials and seek an independent monitor that is perhaps appointed by the state of New York. The state has a big stake in this project. So we need oversight, and the Borough President can fulfill that function, but we can also work with the other elected officials, including the Congress members and our local council members, to ensure that that happens. I am distressed at the fact that all of the trees are being removed. The cost is going to balloon. I'm sure the project will be delayed. There is something that needs to be said, though, which is federal money hinged on this project beginning by a certain date. And that was the pressure, I think, to undertake this, as well as the fact that we didn't want to be hit with another storm in the interim. That's a lot of, obviously, a lot of people's well-being riding on the success of this project. But we need to ensure that the project is successful and that the community is heard. They were dismissed, and that's why we pushed for alienation.
I just have to follow up because
wait, Tommy, I'm sorry. We've
Okay.
spent a lot of time on this, and I just want to make sure we get a couple of other questions in. Sorry to cut you off. Marion, can you go ahead, please?
Sure. Tommy, my question isn't unrelated to yours. And I have to tell you, Brad, when you talked about Pier 76, I had a visceral response, because you go along the west side, there are parks and piers and very well manicured. The whole riverside is beautiful. And then you come over to the east side, and if you go from 23rd Street down to here, we have the East River Park, which, by the way, is not manicured and taken care of. It's taken care of by volunteers. But then we have, south of that, a walkway along the river to South Street, half of which is under construction and has been under construction for months. So that if I want to, during the pandemic, I want to go out and have a walk someplace that's not in the streets, where I have been able to go will be gone. So what are your ideas about what you're going to do for the east side that really is going to give us some? You said you're into outdoor, space and a new vision for Manhattan, but I don't hear any of that being applied to the east side, to the Lower East Side.
Well, I don't represent you right now, so obviously my record, but I think my record is strong in terms of my support for parks and capital funding. We, of course, have a more limited role in terms of parks as state legislators, but I think open space is integral. And it's a shame that the East Side has not had the success in open space that we've had on the West Side. I couldn't agree with you more. I believe that it's a matter of equity borough-wide. And, I'd like to see working with the local council members, if I were borough president, to ensure that if the park reconstruction goes forward, that it's phased to ensure that people have adequate outdoor space, that the mature trees are saved, that historic buildings are saved, and that the community has a voice. That's why I think an independent monitor who can enforce those types of agreements is going to be really important.
Just a quick follow-up, Jeremy, if I may. So I understand that you don't represent our area, but you're running for Manhattan Borough President. We are in the Borough of Manhattan. So I asked the question.
I was talking about my record, Marion.
No, I understand. But I asked you, what do you have? What would you say? What would your plans be as Manhattan Borough President to create green space for an area that's desperately bereft of it?
Yeah, I think that when we discuss capital dollars, we need to do a far better job and dedicating those to open space. I believe that wealthier neighborhoods that have parks should make a contribution to areas that don't have the parks. It's called Parks Equity, and it's a bill that I actually co-sponsored in Albany, along with Senator Daniel Squadron, who used to represent this neighborhood. So Parks Equity is I think a key component of looking at planning among our community boards. That's why I want each community board, Marion, because I haven't represented you. We need to go down. We need to drill down into which each community board sees as its priorities. And that's why a Marshall Plan of sorts with a 197A driven plan will hopefully bring these concerns to the top, not just for the borough president, but for the council and for the entire city administration. So it's about planning. It's not about like firing off successes in one part of the borough and not the other. It's about every one of our 12 boards working with local stakeholders, developing a 197A plan, and doing it within the first 6 months of the next city administration, where ideas and issues like open space can rise to the top.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Keen, I think you're probably our last question for Senator Hoylman.
Okay, thanks. As you guys know, I used to live in Brad's district. I used to be on the community board under Brad. I'm really happy that I'm now down here. But, he did a great job up there, and I'm surprised he's running for borough president, because it doesn't seem to me borough presidents do much, and state senators do a lot. So why are you running for borough president of all offices?
Well, I'll tell you this, the stakes couldn't be higher. And I think the Soho NoHo rezoning is an example of this city administration once again trying to fork over valuable open space to luxury developers and cheating New Yorkers out of affordable housing. I would describe it as stark as that. I would go back to Marion's concerns about open space, or Tommy's concerns about the Coastal Resiliency Project. We need our community boards and our stakeholders at the table. What's the expression? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Well, that's been the case of some of the Lower East Side, some of Northern Manhattan, some of parts of my district in Midtown, where community participation and the voices of the local community have not been heard. I think 197As are a solution that is actually in our charter, and I want to be Keen, the borough president that helps initiate that across the entire borough. I think I have a record of progressive, effective results, and I couldn't be more both concerned and excited about the prospect of 20 million square feet of empty office space that we can leverage on behalf of everyday New Yorkers, working class New Yorkers, people of color, students who are struggling in their public schools, small businesses that are being forced to shutter. This pandemic, in so many ways, is an opportunity on the business and community side if we take advantage of it. And I'm hopeful through a very deliberate planning process, we can get there, because that's what the borough president's office is about, Keen. It's about planning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Senator Hoylman, I think that's the end of our 20 minutes, but it was really great for you to come by tonight. I really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
And we're going to switch gears and start talking again about the district attorney's race, but actually I'm looking to see if our next candidate has joined, and I don't see her on our participants list right now. Hey, Brett, would you just check your email and make sure?
I'm gonna do that right now. So give me 2 seconds.
Okay, thanks. We did have some scheduling difficulties with this last candidate, so that's why I'm just asking Brett to check he had taken care of reaching out.
In the meantime, should we make sure everyone knows how they're voting?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Does anyone have any questions about how to vote? As you know, Grand Street Dems is officially recommending that you vote early in person. If you're in Grand Street Dems, chances are your early voting site is 220 Henry Street. And your vote will get counted on election day. If you're doing an absentee ballot, make sure you have lined up the barcode with the window and signed in the correct places and put your postage on. And if you have any questions at all about the correctness of that, please reach out to us. And if you decide to vote on election day, that's great too. We have been told that there have been so many poll site applications this year. We believe our poll sites are going to be really well staffed. Some of you here right now might in fact be working at a poll site, which is wonderful. But if anyone has any questions at all, raise your hand, unmute yourself, and we can just quickly go over voting options.
Just real quick, Annie Gersh from Tali's campaign said her WNYC forum just wrapped and she's joining us any minute.
Hi, I'm here.
Oh, there she is.
I'm so sorry. George Joseph violated his blood oath to end at 7:45. So I literally just zoomed out and zoomed back in. I'm sorry to keep you all waiting.
It's fine. We just concluded with a couple of other candidates, so we were talking about voting on election day.
Also, an important subject.
Yeah. But I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you.
We haven't had a chance to meet yet. I'm Jeremy Sherber. I'm the president of the club. I know you've been in touch with Brett LETNER, who is also one of our officers. On the call are Carolyn Laskow and Lee Berman, who are 2 district leaders down here, as well as some other amazing dignitaries.
And then we summarize it in a couple of slides so that you will get to see.
Mute Annie. Ms. Weinstein, you are actually the last of the district attorney candidates we've been able to meet. I have to say these have all been really fascinating conversations, and I'm looking forward to this one. We're going to get 20 minutes with you, which is not enough, but it's what we've got. If you want to give a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and let us know what your campaign's about, and then we'll open up for some questions.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. And Jeremy, what's best for you? How long would you like for me to speak for? How much time would you like me to reserve for questions?
I would say about 3 or 4 minutes, and then we can do 15, 16 minutes of questions. Okay, terrific. Thank you again, and thank you all for waiting and for closing out this night with me. When you run for office, as I am for the first time, people ask you, how do you define yourself? And for me, the answer is really easy. I always say that I am an immigrant. I came here as a kid from Iran, as a refugee, getting away from the violence and the instability that was swirling around us during the revolution in Iran. We came with what we could fit into a couple of suitcases. And years later, that remains my framework for how I see the world and how I see the work that I've been trying to do in my career in the law, and particularly in my career in law enforcement. Why do I say that? First of all, I know what it's like to distrust your government. Second, and fundamentally, my parents brought me here to experience fairness and safety, and I never take those things for granted. In fact, I know that opportunity, that equal opportunity, depends on those conditions. And finally, when I see barriers to equal access and to opportunity for anyone, whether it's for immigrants or for our Black neighbors or our Latino neighbors or anybody else, I want to dismantle those barriers. I grew up and I went on to a career across many different institutions in American law. I worked at the Supreme Court as a clerk. I worked at the Department of Justice for Eric Holder as his counsel when he was the Attorney General. I was a federal prosecutor for 6 years, where I did every kind of case, including national security cases, gang cases, murder cases,
gun trafficking. And I can tell you that the most important work I did was the work that I did last, which was to serve as the general counsel and part of the leadership team for Eric Gonzalez, the district attorney in Brooklyn. And I say that because I think that the tremendous power and responsibility of a local district attorney to shape communities and to really change people's lives for the better or for worse in how she decides to use her discretion and how she decides what cases to bring and what cases not to bring is just about the most meaningful and important work that I can imagine. And I want to tell you just a little bit by way of introduction what I mean by that, because that's really my vision of criminal justice reform. It's about pulling back from the cases that don't advance public safety and in fact have perpetuated a racial injustice, poverty, some other kind of unfairness, and excessive sentences, for example, something we might get into, and instead reclaiming and reusing those resources to commit to the core mission of this office to deliver on safety. And my affirmative agenda is too long to recite all of tonight, but I do want to give you some of its core components. First, for me, is gun violence. We have seen, I think, just a shocking and heartbreaking rise in gun violence across the city, particularly this summer when by August we had twice as many shootings as we had all of last year. And that includes the months that people were inside of their homes. Sexual assault and domestic violence, together I call them gender-based violence, and they're a huge part of why I wanted to get into this race in the first place, because I really felt, as I think many women have across the city and across the country, that we just have not taken these harms seriously enough. And that's why these cases are underreported, and when they are reported, poorly prosecuted, and there's widespread victim dissatisfaction. And I intend to build a new Bureau of Gender-Based Violence that centers these cases. Third, Bob Morgenthau used to say that the Manhattan DA is supposed to prosecute from the streets to the suites. And I think that's a pretty good way to sum up the responsibility of this job. Wherever the harm is happening against a New Yorker, we have to take the fight there. I'll have more to say about elder fraud and elder abuse, something that has gotten much worse during COVID. And you know, in other places where, again, the office should really be thinking, what can we do to use the resources that we have to make sure that people feel safe in their communities, to live, to work, to thrive, and to be who they want to be, just as my parents wanted for me when we first came here. I'm going to stop there because I am eager to hear your questions and to hear what's on your mind. Jeremy, I give the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
I will probably take the first question until I see some hands.
Sure.
I think top of mind for a lot of people has to do with the protests that we had all over the country, but also right here in New York over the summer. I know many people on this call were out on the streets for some of that, and the behavior that we witnessed from our own police department was really disappointing. And I think actually just a lot of the leadership surrounding that has continued to depress those of us who maybe even had voted for and supported some of those people. How do you, as district attorney, what leverage do you have to change police behavior and help heal that relationship between the police department and the people of the city?
So it's a great question, Jeremy, because while of course the district attorney does not supervise the police answer to the mayor, I think that the relationship between the DA and the police is complex, and we can have an influence on policing. Let me just first say, you know, top line, as we're having this robust conversation about police reform all around the country, that I think that we really should be sorting policing into three kinds of cases. The kinds of cases where police should have just nothing to do with it, and we should just shrink the police's role in those cases, you know, the proverbial kitten in the tree. Second, the cases where the police as now trained and constituted, don't have the competency to respond fully and to meet all of the needs of the people who are calling them. And they need to either be supplemented by or replaced by social workers who do have those competencies. And third, to really focus on the core mission, which is to protect communities in the face of violent crime and other crimes. And I give that top line because to me, that's also been the project of prosecutorial reform, to shrink our footprint where we're doing things that don't advance public safety, to expand our competencies. You know, in the Brooklyn DA's office, we brought in social workers to do so many things the prosecutors had done before, because it's not like we learned how to do those things in law school. And third, as I said earlier, to really bring our focus to the real drivers of crime and to the people who are really harming New Yorkers. So I think that some of this reform should be happening in tandem. In terms of our influence on them, look, first of all, nobody's above the law, no matter who you are and what uniform you wear. And I've always lived by that principle in my career. And one of the things that DA Gonzalez asked me to do, and I did, was to stand up a new law enforcement accountability bureau where we investigated and prosecuted police officers for violent crime, but also for lying under oath, falsely testifying, crimes that are also really offensive and degrade trust in the system. We also created our own system. I think we were the first in the state to do this for designating police officers who we said were just never credible, and we were not going to let them be the witness on anything in any of our cases, and we published those names. So I think that those are some ways that we can influence policing. And then, of course, you know, as they say on Law and Order, the police, they investigate and they arrest, and then the DA prosecutes, and we don't have to take every case that they bring to us. And sometimes an important part of how we influence the police is by declining prosecution and saying, you can make that arrest, but we're not going to process it. That's what happened in Brooklyn when DA Gonzalez decided that we were not going to prosecute misdemeanor marijuana possession cases anymore. For a while, the police kept making the arrests because they disagreed. And then eventually they stopped because they knew that those cases were not going anywhere.
Thanks. Marion, you've got your hand up.
Yes. Hi, Tali. Thank you.
Hi, Marion.
Thanks for coming here.
My pleasure.
So I'd like to talk more about, you made an expression from the streets to the suites.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in your position on white collar crime. And I assume that's what you mean. Yeah. And how you think the DA's office should be focused on that.
Yeah, so I think that the DA's office should put an enormous amount of its resources and focus into that. I mean, this is New York City. We have a lot of white collar jobs. And I think that we need to stand up for fairness and integrity and fair play in every industry across the city, including in financial services. In those proverbial suites, as it were. You know, I think part of what has happened, Marion, is that the competency to make these cases has really degraded over time. You know, it's much easier to just like react to an incident in the street than to build a long-term white collar, what we used to call in the U.S. Attorney's Office, paper cases. I mean, I sometimes investigated cases in the U.S. Attorney's Office that took me a year, where I had to put 100 people in the grand jury. And we relied on internal investigators in addition to the agents that we were working with, like the FBI or the IRS. I brought a bunch of big tax evasion cases when I was a federal prosecutor. We had to learn and to know how to make those cases. And that's something that I'd like to bring back to the Manhattan DA's office. And, you know, I don't want to jinx anything about the election that is in 20 days, but I want to say that particularly when federal prosecutors, for whatever reason, are not stepping up in these cases, all the more so it is the responsibility of the Manhattan DA to fight for them, to compete for them, and to make those cases.
That's great. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I'm going to keep going until I see another hand. Did I hear your resume correctly that you've had some pretty spectacular prosecutorial experience, but not any experience as a defender?
That's right. I mean, I spent one summer at the Federal Defenders of New York, but no, I've spent almost all of my career in government service, mostly in prosecution.
And I guess I'm just, this is a very broad field of candidates, some of whom are coming entirely from the defender's point of view, and some have been able to be on both sides of that equation. What do you bring to the office that allows for empathy with those who are being accused? And what sorts of programs from the district attorney's office would you be able to reform or introduce that could aid their plight?
Sure. So I think about that a lot, and it has to do with how I introduced myself to you as an immigrant. What I didn't tell you is that the first American that I ever met was a law enforcement officer. It was not a police officer, but it was an INS officer at the airport who was inspecting me and my mom and my little brother as we tried to enter the country on fake tourist visas on Christmas Eve. And at that point, we'd been separated. I was 4 years old. My brother was younger. We'd been separated from my father, who was a couple months ahead of us here. And that officer, in an extraordinary act of compassion, and I would say good judgment and core values, admitted me and my family, even though we did not have the right paperwork, told us to come back in a few days to self-deport. And that gave us enough time to find free lawyers at the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society who wound up representing us for 10 years, pro bono, entirely for free, until we finally got amnesty when President Reagan did that in the late 80s. And about 10 years later, I became an American citizen. And in those years, you know, I didn't really understand what was going on, but my parents would drag me to the INS office in Newark all the time, and we would just sit there, and I knew what was at stake. Even though it was mysterious and I didn't know who these people's uniforms were and what they were actually trying to figure out and decide about us, I felt very vulnerable because I knew what was at stake was whether or not we could stay in this country and continue to live in fairness and safety and in this life that we had here. And I draw on that experience a lot because I actually think that we are better prosecutors if we arrive at every moment in our job realizing that everyone we're interacting with, whether they're the defendant or the victim or the witness who saw something awful, is probably there at one of the lowest and hardest moments of his or her life. And understanding that and peeling away all the different considerations, I think requires enormous humanity. Look, I think it's defense counsel experience, I should say, I think is really valuable. Maybe if you wanted to make a candidate in a petri dish, you could have all the things that I've done and also robust defense experience. And sometimes the next best thing that we can do is to listen and to rely on others. My closest colleague in the Brooklyn DA's office used to be the attorney in charge of the Legal Aid Society in Manhattan. And I found that incredibly helpful to have her experience not just every day, but like every minute as a part of the conversation as we were trying to manage this office together for the district attorney and try to redirect it and to reform it and to make it a different and better place than it was before.
Thanks. Ian, I see a question you dropped in the chat. Do you want to read that out yourself?
Sure. Hi, Ms. Weinstein. I was interested in your position on marijuana reform and how you mentioned what was going on in the Brooklyn DA's office, but how would you build on that, or what would be your policy as Manhattan DA?
Yeah. So I agreed with DA Gonzalez that in almost every instance, we should not be prosecuting these cases. We knew by that point we had a ton of data. It's important to follow the data that these cases had really been brought on the backs of Black Americans, Brown Americans, disproportionately. People were using the drug sort of evenly spread out, and only certain communities were bearing the cost of these prosecutions, and we just weren't advancing public safety. And so we were right to stop, and that was tens of thousands of cases, and I would carry over that policy. I also created myself, as part of my post-conviction justice work, the first program in the state, which has now been superseded by statute, that allowed people to come forward and expunge their prior marijuana convictions, you know, going past the current sealing law that allows you to seal some of your prior convictions. Because if the prosecutions were unfair when they were originally brought, and that was our view, it seemed very unfair to us that people should still have to walk around with all of the burdens, the collateral consequences of not being able to get a job, not be able to live in certain housing, and all the other things that come with a criminal conviction.
Thank you.
Bill?
Hi, thanks for showing up.
Sure.
My question is, I know you've talked about making the police more accountable, but it turns out the police unions, particularly the PBA and the Sergeant Union, have a lot of influence because outstripping the number of their members because of their political donations. Yeah. So have you accepted, or will you accept any donations from the police unions?
Yeah, Bill, I think that unions are a real barrier to reform, police unions, and I have pledged not to take money from any law enforcement union that represents any law enforcement agent that has any kind of work or contact with the Manhattan DA's office. I should also tell you that I'm the only candidate to have made a second pledge, which is only to take $1 from anyone who's in a criminal defense practice in New York, or importantly, and this is really important, also their partners. So you kind of can't get around it by, if you have a case in the Manhattan DA's office or a criminal practice, having your partner make the contribution instead. And the reason I've done that is because I was listening, you know, in the last few years, as so many people felt like those contributions gave the appearance of being able to buy access to this office, and they really degraded trust in the office, and particularly were demoralizing for victims who worried if there had been some kind of influence on the outcome of their case.
Thank you.
Tommy?
Yeah, I want to follow up a little on that.
Sure.
Because the DAs have always been put in a position by the PBA and the other police unions of being threatened that if they come down too hard or if they pursue an issue too hard, that they'll, the PBA and the officers will no longer cooperate with the DA. And the DA's offices have been very reluctant to indict officers. We had a case here on the Lower East Side, which you may have seen. 5 months ago, Officer Garcia abused some people on the street. His gun was taken away. He was put on desk duty, and we're still waiting for adjudication. 5 months later, there's videotape. Why? Where will the DA come in and speak out so that we don't have to rely on the other processes? We're not getting any results.
So Tommy, I can't comment on a case that is open in the Manhattan DA's office now and may still be open when I hopefully assume that office. But I can tell you that I'm not intimidated by anybody. And I think that police officers, like anybody else, have to be held accountable when they violate the law. And I ran the Law Enforcement Accountability Bureau in Brooklyn, where we did in fact indict and prosecute police officers in one case for framing somebody, in other cases for lying under oath, something that we've already talked about.
Are you saying there's a case open in the DA's office on this?
Well, you're telling me about a case that's pending. It's an investigation. It's a case, I don't know. So, you know, I'm just trying to be careful.
Let me ask one last question. Are there any specific instances you can think of, or if not, maybe a general class of crime that you think the current Manhattan DA has not been pursuing, that you think would be a priority for you?
Yes, so I'll just choose one. I think that sex crimes have not been pursued in the way that they should be. And I think actually all of us know that. There's been a lot of reporting around that. And the demoralization is also evident in the fact that people are not coming forward anymore to report these crimes, where they say when they have reported them, the focus has been on investigating the complaining witness, the victim of the crime, rather than investigating the perpetrator of the crime. And I have lots of theories for why this is the case. I think one of them is that we just culturally, like haven't caught up to really understanding that these assaults happen sometimes in the context of consensual relationships. Most often in a sexual assault, the assailant and the victim do know each other. And that's why one of the things that I've written about wanting to do is to make a new Bureau of Gender-Based Violence. And that's not just window dressing, that's saying that we are going to organize all gender-based violence with entirely new training, approach, commitment to prosecution, and that these cases are going to report directly up to the DA so that the DA is accountable, is focusing on them every week, and is held accountable if we don't do better in this area. Thanks.
I think that's our 20 minutes. So thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for hopping on. You've had a long evening of talking about this campaign, so I appreciate your joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This part was lovely. This is much nicer than a 9-candidate forum, I have to tell you.
Excellent. Well, we'll probably have a 9-candidate forum ourselves sometime next month or December, and we'll let you know about that.
I will look forward to it.
But thanks again for joining us. There are a couple of other club announcements before we completely sign off. Michael Marino, do you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to let everyone know it's not necessarily political related, but we all know that Halloween's going to be very different this year. So my organization, Friends of Corlears Park, is trying to do something for the kids. So we are going to be hosting an outdoor trick-or-treating experience in the park on Halloween Saturday from 11 to 1 p.m. We've got about 8 organizations and families signed up already to hand out candy, and about 80 kids signed up already to come get candy. We have to have people sign up in advance as part of the COVID protocols from the Parks Department in order for us to be allowed to do events. We're only allowed to have 50 people in the park at any given time. So we're going to be sending out some information closer to the event about people's sort of scheduled time to come get their kids trick-or-treating. But we're looking for more people to hand out candy. So if you normally have kids come to your apartment and you're not doing that this year and you want to do it out in the park, just go to friendsofcorlears.org and you can sign up there. And Grant Street Dems will be there handing out candy.
Yes, we will. Okay, great. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everybody. Congratulations, Brett and Marion and Judy. Please look out for emails about our 2020 activities, phone banking fundraiser on Saturday. And I hope to see you guys all at those events so that we can have a big celebration on November 3rd or November 4th or November 20th, whenever this election is actually going to be over.
And congratulations, Jeremy. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Congratulations to you, Jeremy.
Thanks very much. Thank you all. All right. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks.